really kind of have two objectives that I'd like to accomplish today. The first one would be talking about some of the new reproductive technologies with respect to artificial insemination that are being used. And then the other one is to kind of go over a little bit of the data that we've generated in the last 6 months on one of the pork board funded projects in our lab that also has some relevance to lifetime productivity that would have kind of complements what Billy talked about. So if you think about reproductive technologies, there's a group of us in the NCERA 57 cluster. There's about 12 or 13 faculty members, one from different animal science departments around the country. Billy Flowers is a member of it. I'm the representative for Iowa State. There's about a dozen of us to 15 depending on the year, and we get together every year and talk about swine reproduction. We bounce off research ideas off each other. We present research data to each other and question each other. And one of the things that we do in that group also is every other year we produce a workshop on swine reproduction. And so this last year, the workshop that we had in 2012 was really focused on AI technologies. We brought in 4 different people to kind of discuss that, and I'm going to summarize the first half of today, kind of what we got out of that and what the value of that is, and kind of give you my perspective on the implications I think that it has for our industry moving forward. So Ron Ketchum, the four people that talked there were Ron Ketchum with Swine Management Services. He kind of went over and gave kind of the background and the economics of artificial insemination, looked at some of the trends in the industry, comparing kind of some of the top 10% of the farms that he works with, as well as how all the farms that he works with, what their production records are looking like. Brad Didion from Minitube talked about utilization of frozen sperm. Hanneke Feitsma, we had piped in online from the Netherlands. She works with Top Pigs, and they've dramatically changed the way that they work with semen, and they've essentially utilized about 1.5 billion sperm per dose now, rather than 3 billion sperm, which is pretty standard over here. So they're dramatically advancing the utilization of genetically superior boars by reducing the sperm numbers. And then also Howard Hill from Iowa Select talked to us about their success in implementing post-cervical AI, which is also another strategy to expedite and move quickly through the breeding process, and also dramatically reducing sperm numbers, thereby increasing the amount of the number of females that an individual boar could cover. So if we think about the industry, some of the changes that have happened, they changed pretty dramatically. It reminds me of a quote that a lot of times we underestimate what we can accomplish in 2 years, but we overestimate what we can accomplish in 2 years and underestimate what we'll accomplish in 10. And if you think back 20 years ago, 25 years ago, most of the matings in the swine industry were occurring through natural mating. And then in the last 20 years, it's dramatically increased to almost all, and swine reproduction is occurring through artificial insemination. So one of the things that Ron Ketchum talked with our group about was just kind of the trends just in the total number born in the industry. And if you look over 2005 to 2011, we've seen about a pretty substantial increase, 1.5 pigs per litter, really for the whole industry. But you can kind of see in the purple line there, those individuals or those farms that are up on the top 10% of producers are right around 14 pigs born per sow per litter in 2011, and the average for kind of all the people that Ron works with is right around 13.2. If you look at farrowing rate, you start to see a little bit more discrepancy there. It's about 90% for the top 10% of the farms, and that's up from 85% in 2005. Also trending up, it's an industry-wide trend, but there is a disparity between those farms in the top 10% as compared to the general industry altogether. The other thing, too, that you see some substantial differences is that I think is important is the wean to estrus interval. The top 10% are consistently around 6 days, a little bit less than 6 days from weaning to first service, whereas some of the other farms are up around 7 days. So there's There's definitely a difference in that, and that's not really trended too much in the last 5-6 years. So, kind of summarize those industry stats, the ones that I think are relevant when you start thinking about assisted reproductive technologies or really implementing a new artificial insemination technology, is one of the things that you want to do is not screw anything up if you're already doing a good job. And because it's going to be really difficult to improve on a 91% farrowing rate. So a lot of these technologies, the justification for using them is not necessarily that you're going to see a substantial increase in farrowing rate. It's going to be difficult to increase total number born, but where you really have the savings is in the labor and in the ability to expand the number of boars or number of females that an individual set of boars can cover. So that's something I think that's an important component of implementing a new technology is not compromising where you're at, but also having an appreciation and not having the expectation that utilizing a new technology is going to be able to overcome some of these differences that are already existing, probably have some underlying pathologies for why they're there. So that was kind of the history of it. One of the things that Hanneke Feitsma pointed out, her presentation was titled "How Low Can You Go?" and I'll give you guys a web address. You can still go. We've posted this on our extension website. You can still go watch this entire presentation. But if you kind of look at what the Dutch system has done with their herd over the last 20 years, is they've dramatically reduced the number of sperm that they're using per dose, and at the same time are dramatically increasing the number of weaned pigs per sow. And that's a pretty common trend. But what I'd say is the difference is the point that where they're at right now at 1.5 billion sperm per dose. And I'll give you just a little bit of an idea how they work towards getting to that point. And they're pretty aggressive. She's pretty aggressive in where they think they can go with that. And she would like to be in another 10, 15 years down to half that much again to 750 million sperm per dose. So when you look at their production system, their top 10%, top 20% is really hanging with the U.S. swine industry with respect to weaned piglets per sow per year, with the respect to farrowing rate. But what they're using, and if you look at what they're doing over here on their standard procedure for AI, they're using fresh semen. One of the differences, or the major differences, they're using 1.5 billion motile sperm cells. They're using normal cervical insemination. One slight difference is that they consider their shelf life of their fresh sperm 4 days, where we might use it a little bit longer for 6, 7 days here. So how do they do that? And if you watch Dr. Feitsma's presentation, one of the things that they do is they've developed a sperm quality index for every single boar that they have. And this is accomplished through specific semen parameters, which I'll show you in a second, which affect fertility and performance. And then they weigh those factors to basically calculate a semen quality index by which they can use to determine how many sperm that boar is going to be able to require per insemination to be effective in meeting their standards with total number born and farrowing rate. So these are the effects that they, if you have a chance, here's the website, I'll show it to you again, but if you have a chance, you can go through there, and Hanneke does a very good job describing the ability of motility, the ability of morphology, longevity of the sperm to have a direct effect on fertility. And so her data with these factors suggests that 4 to 8% of fertility is directly affected by the boar. Okay, and so for example, she goes through and plots some data with just tracking the motility on hundreds of boars, and can demonstrate that differences in motility will cause a difference in 0.1 piglet per litter. Differences in morphology can have a 0.01 piglet per litter effect. And when you start packaging all those together, they're able to calculate and create that sperm quality index that they utilize to be able to reduce their sperm numbers down to 1.5 billion cells per dose. So that was kind of I thought that was an important component because it really enables producers to utilize fewer boars, have fewer boars on hand, and really optimize and maximize the utility of those boars on their females. So it allows for a more rapid genetic improvement by utilizing fewer, more elite boars. So Howard Hill also talked about utilizing post-cervical AI. I'd say this is not very widespread use, but the Iowa Select Systems implemented it throughout their program, and he did a very excellent job describing some of the barriers and some of the limitations of it, but also how to implement a post-cervical AI system. And so I just wanted to go through a few things regarding the implementation and the utilization of post-cervical AI. One of the things that's a little bit different, you can see you still place the catheter in the cervix, but once that catheter is placed in the cervix, there's an inner catheter that then can be threaded up to the uterine body. So what that allows, what that facilitates, is the utilization of about half as many sperm cells in about half as much volume as is usually utilized in a single insemination. Okay, so this is actually the tip that they utilize in Iowa Select. This is the AI rod. You place this in the cervix. There's actually a little cover over the tip that keeps it sterile. Once you have the rod placed, then you can push that through the tip and extend it about 3 to 6 inches up near the uterine body. So this is kind of how the system works. It's a little bit unique with post-cervical AI because you got to make sure there's no boar around. So that means somebody's got to come in and heat check, and you have to be very good at it and make sure those sows are in heat. And then you got to wait about 30 minutes at least to an hour to make sure those sows are not responding still to the boar stimulation, because that really affects how contracted the cervix are when that animal's actually in heat. So then different employees, different folks will come in and start setting those catheters in those sows that don't smell like the boar, haven't been around the boars. So what this guy's doing in the front here, he's coming down the line. They've got the sows marked that were in heat that day, and he's setting these catheters. And the guy following in behind him, you can kind of see he's got this bag. So he's not using a normal individually dosed semen. And as he works through the line, you can see here he's got multiple sows set up at once. As this guy's working through the line, it's kind of like a pour-on gun for ivermectin on a beef cow. And the average time for insemination for this guy right here is about 10 seconds. So you save quite a bit of time, and you also save quite a bit of time in the bore stud too, because if you think about packaging that semen, there's 50 to 100 doses in that bag that's extended batch semen that can be brought into the barn and utilized pretty rapidly. So you got some savings in not only in the time and insemination, but you also have some savings in the bore stud there as well. And then also again, by reducing the number of sperm cells that you're utilizing per insemination, you're going to also expand the utility of the boars that you do have. I think Howard, I don't have the numbers up here, but when he was describing their ability to implement this, it only works in sows, so it's not quite a 50% reduction in boars. So they don't use it on gilts, but for a 4,200 sow farm, they can go from 20 boars down to 14 boars. And when you start calculating the genetic changes and the genetic improvement that you can make through that, even if it's only a dime per piglet produced, that has a pretty substantial impact when you start talking about when you're doing this on thousands of pigs. So, does it work? How well? You know, I mentioned before, one of the things you don't want to do is compromise productive reproduction parameters. And so this is a couple examples that he provided with two different farms, their pre-Pharaoh or their pre-PCAI data, about an 86% farrowing rate. That was 87 after they implemented. Total born didn't change, weaning average didn't change, pigs per sow per year didn't change, but was slightly increased. Same thing with the other farm. They actually had a little more marked increase using PCAI. So one of the things that I would probably caution you on is that this is after they worked out some of the kinks. And if you go in and start utilizing a technology like this, a lot of times there's some problems initially that you got to work around, finding the right person to set the catheters, getting experience with the physiology of using a post-PCAI system is going to affect the initial success. So this is kind of after they pioneered their way through some of the first bumps. So that was kind of what we talked about. So that was kind of the summary of a 3-hour program that day that we kind of went over. And one of the other things, too, that I don't know if you guys have seen in the booth here, and obviously one of the newer products that's going to make it to the market this year is the use of Ovugel. So I don't know how many people in the room are familiar with Ovugel or what it does, but really what it is an intravaginally administered GnRH agonist. So if you think about what GnRH is doing, a lot of people in this room have probably used PG600 before, that stimulates a gilt to come into puberty. GnRH is one step above that from an endocrine standpoint, and it really drives FSH and LH. And so its utility in a post-wean sow is that it can be administered at a specific time point and facilitate timed ovulation or synchronized ovulation in these sows. And so the data is out there, and in post-wean sows, if you use Ovugel appropriately and correctly to synchronize estrus, you can consistently get on single timed inseminations equivalent farrowing rates to heat checking and AIing. So I think that's another thing that's going to be on the market soon. There's going to be another tool in the chest that can be utilized for producers and for the industry to be able to change the way they manage their sows and the reproductive management of the sows. So one of the things that, as I was sitting through that workshop and thinking about these things, is, some of these are difficult to implement one at a time, and that's what I'd recommend too, is implementation of some of these strategies one at a time. But I think long term for our industry, one of the things that we have here is an opportunity is to work towards single low dose post-cervical timed insemination. I think that will really, if we can get to that point, that will really change the amount of effort that we're spending in the sow barn and the number of boars that we're utilizing to get those sows bred. So I think the opportunities and efficiency are labor savings there, and the fewer boars that we utilize, I think we'll have a pretty substantial ability to improve our genetics, in addition to making the swine industry a little more flexible in the ability to disseminate new traits throughout the industry. So, that is an industry that's constantly changing, and also from the genetic perspective, it's constantly changing too. And I think when you can get away with using fewer boars on more sows, you're going to accelerate that transmission and dissemination of those traits throughout the industry. So future challenges, I think, would be to be able to utilize these AI technologies and be able to figure out a way that we can apply them to the mitigation of seasonal infertility. So, how do we use these tools, or can we use these tools during periods of seasonal infertility to overcome some of the issues with farrowing rate and litter size that we see during certain seasons of the year? So I think some of the take-home message from some of these new AI technologies would be, what are the reasons for implementing this? Okay, because you're not likely to have a substantial impact on your farrowing rate, total number born, or the number born alive. But you can decrease the costs, right? So that's where the savings is in the efficiency. The savings labor that you save in efficiency, if you think back to that second or third slide that I showed you, unless you want to unless you want to get rid of people, one of the things you can do is start taking some of that labor that you're saving in efficiency and put it back into the farrowing room, which would kind of support what Billy's data showed on some of his data, that those farms that are spending time in the farrowing room have better sow longevity. They also have the opportunity to increase the number of weaned pigs per sow at the end of that farrowing room. So I would say utilizing some of that time that's spent in the boar stud, some of the time that's spent in the sow barns and the gestation barns getting them bred, could be put back into that day 0 to 2 piglet care, and that's an area where you can actually still probably make some substantial improvements. So from an implementation, I would say, these are the types of things that you want to walk into, not run into, and that it's probably a good idea to implement them incrementally. and make those decisions and adjustments based on the data. Keep records, keep data what you're doing, and always trust the data. It's the interpretation of the data that can get you in trouble, but trust the data and understanding why you're getting the data that you're getting. So those are kind of the take-home messages, I think, from that I wanted to share with what our NCERA 57 group was doing in the last year. And I'll give you my email address at the end of the day. If you guys would like any of those presentations that we had, shoot me an email and I can send those to you. So the other thing that I kind of wanted to discuss today was one of our projects that's funded by the Pork Board, and is a project that we started last summer, looking at identifying measurements that would be useful in the prediction of age at first puberty. So age at first puberty is an important trait. It impacts the profitability of a swine enterprise. One of the ways that it impacts it is that those gilts that demonstrate puberty earlier typically have fewer non-productive days compared to those that demonstrate their first estrus later in life. So for that reason, age of first puberty has been utilized, or has a common association with sow productive lifetime. But it's not something that a lot of producers have a good grasp on. And as Billy mentioned in his talk, a lot of the boar exposure in some of these sows isn't happening until after they're 180, 200 days of age. And so what I'll show you is that if you start heat checking soon enough, some of these pigs will come into heat at 140 days, and some of them won't come in within 200 days. And so there's quite a bit of variation, but one of the problems with that is that it's pretty labor intensive to be able to start heat checking that early. And so what we wanted to do is to look for some markers that could be utilized early in life, prepubertal markers that might be relevant to predicting age of first puberty. So this is another chart that was published a few years ago, just looking at fallout in sows over their parities, and the pigs that have a early puberty have the longest sustainability. Those pigs that did not show or demonstrate estrus within 180 days but were still included in the herd fall out the fastest compared to those that demonstrate puberty earlier in life. So one of the things that started cluing us into this is a couple years ago we were doing a collaborative project at Iowa State. It was actually a heat stress project, but we were sacrificing some gilts on day 98 of age, and we had 48 of them that we sacrificed, and a couple of us thought, you know what, let's go out there and collect the ovaries. We might want to use them for something, and we'll get them in the freezer and fix them in paraformaldehyde. One of the things we started noticing is that 21 of those gilts had ovaries just like this. They had no follicular development, and 27 of them had ovaries like this, where they got 40, 50, 60 tertiary follicles on each ovary. And so you can see the difference too, because there's a lot of estrogen. You can see differences in the size of the vulva. And so that really kind of led us to the idea that these gilts that demonstrate follicular activity the earliest are going to be more likely those that cycle sooner. And what can we use? And what we need to do is identify some phenotypical distinctions between those gilts that can be utilized for criteria to predict which animals are going to come into heat or estrus sooner. So that was really the objective of the experiment, was to test that hypothesis. We took a group of 160 pigs to begin with, and we wanted to demonstrate variability in follicular development and its association really with vulva development, serum estradiol, body weight, some other measurements to really determine if those factors have any predictive value when taken early in life, whether or not that animal is going to come into heat or reach her first estrus earlier than other animals in that group. So this is kind of our experimental design. So what we did, we started with 155 gilts that were within a couple days of age of each other. And then on days 75 through 115 days of age, we went out there and we weighed every single one of them. And we used these calipers down here and measured in millimeters the width of the vulva, the length of the vulva, calculated the vulva area. We pulled blood on 150 of them every single time. And then each time also, after we got through all that, we would sacrifice 10 of them. And we would look at their follicular development in their ovary, and we would also weigh their uterine weight. So what we were really looking for is, is there a difference once we sacrifice them and see, okay, now we have the vulva measurements on these animals, we also can look at their the follicular activity on their ovaries, and we also have these measurements that would be predictive of estrogen production from that the follicular activity on the ovaries by measuring the vulva length and width. So after we did that, so we were 50 gilts short after we went through those 10 different stages of sacrificing pigs. We started heat checking the remaining 105 at 129 days of age, and we did that every day until they were 200 days of age. And then we kind of worked on determining some of the associations between those phenotypes that we recorded and their age at first estrus. So this is just the body weight gain, nothing really unexpected there. You'd expect them to be getting heavier each time, and that's what they did. Same with vulva length and during prepubertal development and vulva width, not a lot of difference there. They get wider and they get longer, but what we are really interested in is the variation. When does the variation start to occur within that 105 pigs? When can we start picking out differences? What's a good time point to be able to select a different, to select one pig compared to the other? So if you look at the change in the vulva area, that's just the length times the width. Not a substantial difference there either. You'd expect it to go up at each time point. So what we did think was interesting, though, when we started looking at the gilts that we sacrificed and evaluating their ovaries, when you look at those 10 gilts on day 75, none of them have follicular activity. When you look at them at day 115, they almost all have follicular activity, and most of them have between 10 and 100 small follicles on their ovary. So where we're kind of clued into is this 85 to 105 day range, where you really see a lot of the variation in those animals. And that's really when you want to start making those decisions. Which animal, that's when you can look at them and say, okay, which one's more advanced, which one's behind with some of these measurements. So that's where we are interested in, this 95 to 105 days, when estrogen production is starting to come up because of that tertiary follicle development on those ovaries. We're going to hopefully see some differences in the vulva width and vulva length as a response to that estrogen. And so we do see a pretty substantial effect on the weight of the uterus, okay? And that really corresponds well with when we see that increase in follicular activity, the size of the uterus goes up. And the uterus is probably one of the best biological assays in the pig because it's extremely sensitive to estrogen activity, and it undergoes a lot of rapid mitosis and growth and development under the control of estrogen. So we see a pretty substantial increase in this 85 to 105 day range in those gilts. When we're heat checking them, this kind of gives you an idea on the distribution of the age of first estrus. So the first pig, like I said, we had some come in at 140 days of age, and then out of those 105, we had 26 of them that didn't cycle within 200 days of age. And that's really what we're wanting to get, is how can we figure out these gilts before we load them into a trailer and take them from the multiplier to the commercial barn? Is there something that we can do back here at day 75 to 105 that we can figure out and cut out the majority of these that aren't going to be responsive when we start heat checking? Because as Billy mentioned, the ones that start cycling earlier in life are more likely to have a higher ovulation rate. They're also more likely to have fewer non-productive days. And that's another thing where in the industry, a lot of times we don't really appreciate how many non-productive days these gilts actually cost us, because most of the animals aren't getting entered into the databases and the record systems until the day that they're bred. So you really have quite a few non-productive days compared to their cohorts in some cases when those animals aren't getting entered into the system until their first breeding. So these are some of the associations that we made. So we wanted to determine, okay, the first thing we ask is what's the body weight association with their ability to achieve puberty within 200 days? And really, this is the chi-square value, not that substantial, really not much of a relationship looking at does body weight affect whether they're going to reach puberty by 200 days of age. Although if you take those 100 or those 85 gilts really that did come into heat within 200 days, and you draw a correlation between their body weight on day 75, there's a significant correlation. Significant, it's a weak correlation, but it's a significant correlation that those pigs that are the heaviest on day 75 are more likely to achieve their first puberty earlier than those that are lighter. And that's only effective on those that actually did come into estrus. And after day 75, you kind of lose the ability to detect that. The correlation's gone by day 85 to 115. And I think that kind of goes back and is supported with some of the observations Billy's been making, that those pigs that are born heavier, those pigs that are weaned heavier, typically are going to have a better performance. They're more likely to respond to PG600 at a younger age. And I think we're still seeing some of that at day 75, but by the time you get out to 115 days, there's too much variation in body weight to really be able to make those types of decisions. So if you break this down and kind of say, okay, looking at the body weight on day 75, what does that really mean? So what we have over here on the left side, these three sets of bars are the pigs that we took their body weights on day 75. This would be the top 25% body weights. Over here on the right is the bottom 25% of the body weights. And the blue bar is the percentage of those pigs in that group that were reached puberty by 180 or by 200 days of age. So if you take the heaviest 25% of that cohort of gilts on day 75, we found that 77% of those are cycling by 180 days of age, whereas the lightest group at 75 days, only 46%. So 31% less achieve their first puberty within 180 days, just based on their body weight at day 75. If you look at body weight at day 115, and this is just to show the distinction there that this isn't as valuable later in life, there's only a 15% disparity between those heaviest ones on day 115 versus the lightest ones on day 115 with respect to their ability to achieve their first estrus before 180 days. So again, so that was one of the things we looked at was body weight, and that seemed to be most valuable earlier. The earlier in life, the more valuable that was. When we looked at the vulva length and the vulva area, the chi-square associations are really pretty weak, but they're the strongest, and you can see a substantial trend towards that day 95. And biologically, that makes a lot of sense, because that's really when we saw the big variation in this group of gilts with respect to some not having any follicular activity and some having a lot of follicular activity. So if we started doing the correlations using vulva width basically as a proxy for estrogen production that's happening in that animal, those animals that have a larger or wider vulva at day 105 had one of the strongest correlations to their ability to their age of first estrus. So the larger the vulva on those animals, the earlier they came in. One of the downsides to our statistical analysis that we utilized is that because we stopped heat checking on day 200, we don't have heat dates for all those gilts that didn't come into heat. So we don't have values for those, and I think that would have really, if we kept heat checking out to 250, 275 days and got the rest of those 25 pigs, we might have had a little stronger correlation here, because a lot of those animals had smaller vulva areas and vulva size at day 95 to 115. So again, here's another vulva width. If you look at 115 days of age, after the reproductive tract has had some time to respond to those differences in estradiol that are starting to come up at day 95 to 105 of birth, there's a very strong statistical correlation, or the correlation's not that strong, 0.28 R value, but statistically it's a fairly significant correlation. So what does that really mean? If you look at those matrices and you just say, okay, if I was going to go in and look at the vulva area on this 105 gilts, and I want to determine its responsibility or its relationship with those gilts' ability to achieve their first estrus or puberty by 180 days of age, because that's really what we want. We want to bring gilts into the system that have cycled or would have had the ability, had they been exposed to boars, to have cycled by 180 days of age. And if you look, what we've done here basically is we took the vulva areas at each of these days and we basically stratified them using standard deviations. So this would be, the green bars would represent about 65% of the gilts in that group with the median vulva area. The red bar here at day 75, that'd be the 18% of the gilts that had the smallest vulva area, and this would be on the blue bar, that 18% that had the largest vulva area. And then the percentage over here is the percentage of those groups that achieved estrus by 180 days. And really what you see is that utilizing vulva area as a marker, as a predictive tool at 75 or 85 days, really has no merit at that point. But once you get out here to day 95 to 115, you take those 17–18% of the gilts that have a really small vulva on day 95 compared to their peers, and there are only about 30% of them achieve puberty within 180 days. Whereas those that are within the standard deviation or greater than one standard deviation of the mean with respect to the size of the vulva, it's about 60% of those will achieve puberty by 180 days. So I think that's a pretty useful marker. I think we want to continue to pursue this in the utility and really also start looking at some of the physiology of what's driving this, because what we'd like to be able to do also is to develop a quantitative marker that we can measure something that's going to be predictive of how that animal is going to perform potentially with respect to age at first puberty, which is a good indicator of how they're going to perform later in production. So one of the values of doing a study like this, or of this nature, where you have 1,500 blood samples in the freezer, and then retrospectively you know which animals came into heat between 140 days and 160 days compared to the animals that didn't cycle even within 200 days, because those are really the ones you want to get rid of right away. And so we started measuring a peptide in the blood. That this is pretty preliminary data, so I won't say what the peptide is in case this doesn't pan out, because we've still got about 20 more animals in each group to measure. But we've measured 8 animals across all the days that were cycled within between 140 and 160 days. And we took another 8 animals that didn't cycle, that were out of that group, that didn't cycle within 200 days, randomly pulled them out of that 26. And when we look at this blood marker, you don't see any difference at day 75 or 85. But when you get up to 95 to 115, this blood marker is less than 50% of the level of those gilts that are going to cycle by the time within 200 days of age. Within 160 days of age compared to those that do not cycle within 200 days of age. So that's kind of where we're going. I think we want to keep pursuing this and really look towards not only identifying the phenotypic markers that can be utilized right there on the farm, but also trying to find some physiological blood markers that can be useful in making these selections. Because as Billy mentioned, it's difficult from a genetic standpoint to select for sow longevity and age of first puberty, but it is possible, that there's a gilt that's going to come out of a litter of 13 that's going to be able to perform reproductively better than her 6 sisters. And so a lot of that has to do with, so there is some gilts that are going to come out. They're going to have a little better birth weight. They're going to perform better during lactation. They're going to perform better during the nursery. And what we want to find is what are some of the markers we can utilize that identifies those pigs at one time point without having to track all that data on the farm. So some of the summaries and implications, I would say these data, they demonstrate an association between vulva development on day 95 and the ability to achieve puberty within 200 days. There's a lot of, the R values were low, so there's a lot of contributing factors there, but that's one of them. Of those animals that achieve puberty within 200 days, body weight at day 75 and the vulva width at 105 and 115 days had the best correlation with age of first puberty in this project. And so these developmental time points collectively represent potential opportunities to evaluate a cohort of replacement gilts to at minimum at least separate some of the chaff from the wheat and get some of the ones that are likely not to be reproductive or successfully reproductively out of the group early on.